Most of you watching this right now are walking straight into a financial slaughterhouse, and the worst part is you're smiling while you do it. Why? Because you've got that fancy $3,000 leather binder sitting in your safe labeled Revocable Living Trust. But what if I told you that binder is actually a Trojan horse? You've been sold the great American lie. You've been told that a revocable trust is the ultimate shield, that it protects your home, keeps the government's hands off your legacy, and means you've finally beaten the system. Spoiler alert, you haven't, not even close. Look, I'm going to be 100% real with you. At age 65, that revocable trust stops being a shield and starts being a gift-wrapped invitation for the state to seize every single penny you've ever earned. It's not a fortress, it's a bullseye. You see, these trusts are great at avoiding probate, which, let's face it, is just a minor courtroom annoyance. But while you're worrying about probate, you're leaving the front door wide open for something much deadlier, the Medicaid clawback. Ever heard of a systemic chain reaction that liquidates your entire life? We're talking about a liquidation vortex that will suck the air out of your 401k, slash your Social Security checks, and leave your kids with a $0 balance. And it's all perfectly legal under 42 U.S. Code Section 1396P. Today, we are stripping away the marketing fluff and the lawyer speak. I'm going to show you exactly how the system is designed to wait until you're at your most vulnerable to pull the rug out from under you. If you don't understand the look-back sequence, you aren't leaving an inheritance. You're just financing a state-run nursing home for 6 months before you go completely broke. Does that sound like a plan to you? Of course not. It sounds like a scam, but it's just how the law works. Let's talk about why your family lawyer probably skipped the most important chapter of your estate plan. See, they sold you a solution for the 1990s, but we're living in the 2020s where healthcare costs inflate 3 times faster than everything else. Your safe plan is actually a ticking time bomb. Think of your revocable trust like a high-end waterproof phone case. It works great if you drop your phone in a sink. That's probate. But you're about to drop your phone into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. That waterproof case isn't going to do a damn thing against the crushing pressure of a $12,000 a month nursing home bill. Because here is the hard legal truth. If you can revoke the trust, the government says you still own the money. And if you own it, they can and will take it. In the eyes of the Department of Health and Human Services, your trust isn't a vault. It's an ATM with the PIN code written on the back. But wait. It gets so much worse than just losing the cash. When the state starts coming for your assets, they trigger a domino effect of taxes and penalties that most people don't see coming until their bank account is literally screaming for help. Have you ever heard of the IRMAA Trap? It's a closed-loop system designed to drain the tank until it's dry. You worked 40 years to build your castle, but you're handing the keys to the government because of a single word: revocable. Ready to see how this nightmare actually plays out in the real world? Let's look at a story that happens every single day in this country, but nobody talks about it because it's too painful. This is the story of Margaret, and if you don't pay attention, her story is going to be your story. She did everything right and still lost everything. Let's talk about Margaret, 71 years old, a retired school teacher from Ohio. Margaret was the kind of person who never missed a Sunday service and always had her taxes filed by February. She did everything by the book, but the book was rigged. She had a $400,000 401k and a home worth about $500,000. In her mind, that home was in trust, so it was a fortress. She thought she'd finally crossed the finish line. But life has a funny way of throwing a wrench in the gears. One Tuesday morning, the unthinkable happened. A minor stroke. Not enough to kill her, thank God, but enough to require 24/7 long-term care. And in America, that care comes with a price tag that would make a rock star sweat. We're talking $12,000 a month, every single month. When Margaret's family applied for Medicaid to cover that $144,000 a year bill, they walked into the office with their heads held high, clutching that leather binder. They thought they had an ace up their sleeve. But the caseworker didn't even blink. They looked at that revocable trust and said, "This isn't a shield, folks. This is a piggy bank, and we're about to break it open." Why? Because of a little thing called 42 U.S. Code Section 1396P. Here is the hard legal truth your family lawyer probably skipped over while you were picking out the font for your trust documents. Under Section D3 of that code, if a trust is revocable, the entire thing is an available resource. That means, in the eyes of the Department of Health and Human Services, you own it 100%. If you can change the trust, if you can touch the money, then the state says you must use it to pay the nursing home. Does that make sense? Your protection is actually a liability. The state told Margaret, to qualify for help, you need to go through a spend down. Now that sounds like a boring accounting term, right? Wrong. It's a financial execution. To get Medicaid, the government demands you spend down until you have roughly $2,000 left in your name. That's it. $2,000. You can't even buy a decent used lawnmower for $2,000. So Margaret was forced to sell the family home she'd lived in for 40 years just to pay the nursing home while she waited for Medicaid eligibility. But here's where the nightmare truly began to spiral out of control. The moment she sold that house, she didn't just lose her home, she triggered a massive capital gains tax. Suddenly, the IRS wanted their cut of the profit from a sale she didn't even want to make. But wait, it gets even more insulting. That income from the sale then triggered an IRMAA surcharge on her Medicare. If you're not familiar, IRMAA is the government's way of saying, "Oh, you had a good year? Give us more money." Her Social Security check, her only lifeline, was slashed by 40%. She was being penalized for being too rich while she was literally losing every cent she ever worked for. She was stuck in a financial no man's land. Too wealthy for the state to help, but too broke to pay the bills. She died in a state-funded ward 3 years later. The trust was empty. The home was gone. The inheritance she wanted to leave for her grandkids? It didn't exist anymore. The plan didn't fail, guys. It worked exactly how the system designed it. The system isn't broken. It's a finely tuned machine designed to harvest the wealth of the middle class. And if you think you can just give your house to your kids to hide it, think again. The state has a 60-month look-back rule. They will track every single penny you moved in the last 5 years. If they catch you moving money, they'll hit you with a transfer penalty that leaves you stranded. Imagine being disqualified from Medicaid for 50 months because you tried to be clever at age 66. You're left with no help, no assets, and a mountain of medical debt. So how do we stop the bleeding? Before we get to the surgical strike to save your home, we need to talk about the part no one sees coming, the tax collision. This is where the IRS and Social Security team up to finish you off. Now, if you think losing the house was the end of the story, buckle up, because this is where the system gets truly surgical. This is what I call the tax collision, and it's the part no one sees coming. See, when Margaret was forced to sell her home and drain her 401k to pay that nursing home, the government didn't just say, "Thanks." They treated that forced sale like she'd just won the lottery. Under Social Security Act Section 1839I, there's a little monster called IRMAA, the Income-Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. Think of it as a success tax on people who are actually going broke. The government looks at your tax return from 2 years ago to decide how much you should pay for Medicare today. It's like the IRS is driving your car while only looking in the rearview mirror. Because Margaret sold her assets to pay for her care, her adjusted gross income went through the roof. 2 years later, while she was sitting in that facility, the hammer dropped. The Social Security Administration sent her a letter saying, "Hey, we saw you had a great year back then, so we're tripling your Medicare Part B and Part D premiums." But wait, here's the crazy part. Since those premiums are automatically deducted from your Social Security check, her monthly income didn't just dip, it vanished. She was literally paying a penalty for the money she used to save her own life. It's like being in the middle of a house fire and the fire department charges you a luxury water fee while they're spraying your living room. Does that sound fair? Of course not, but the system doesn't care about fair. But wait, it gets even more twisted. We have to talk about the Secure Act 2.0 and the required minimum distribution trap. If you're over 72, you're basically a target for this. The law says you must take a certain amount of money out of your IRA every year. If you don't, they hit you with a 25% excise tax, A quarter of your money, gone, just like that. So Margaret was forced to take those distributions. But here's the kicker. That mandatory withdrawal counts as income. And what happens when your income goes up? It can disqualify you from Medicaid for another month. You're caught in a financial catch-22. If you take the money, you're too rich for Medicaid. If you don't take it, the IRS steals 25%. It's a closed-loop system designed to ensure the tank stays dry. You are being squeezed from both sides by the very agencies that are supposed to be your safety net. It's not a glitch. It's a feature of the Liquidation Vortex. Look, I know this sounds grim. It feels like you're playing a game of poker where the house changes the rules every time you get a good hand. But here's the thing. The ultra-wealthy aren't playing this game. The 1% aren't using revocable trusts. They're using family-limited partnerships and complex offshore structures to bypass these rules entirely. They've built a bridge over the vortex while you're stuck in a rowboat with a hole in it. The middle class is the only group that gets hit this hard because they're rich enough to have something to lose, but poor enough to not have a team of lobbyists. You worked 40 years to build your castle, but you're handing over the keys. You've been told that spending down is just a part of getting old. I'm here to tell you that's a lie. You don't have to be a victim of the tax collision. You need to pivot. You need to stop thinking about probate and start thinking about divestment. So how do we actually fight back and keep the house? I'm going to give you the 3-step surgical strike that can stop this vortex in its tracks. This is the legal counterattack the state doesn't want you to know about. We're moving from the slaughterhouse to the firewall. Ready for the solution? Let's get tactical. Look, we've talked about the nightmare. Now let's talk about the alarm clock that wakes you up from it. You don't have to be another Margaret. If you're 65, or even if you're approaching it, you need to stop thinking about probate and start thinking about divestment. We're moving from the slaughterhouse to the firewall. Here is your 3-step surgical strike to save your home and keep your cash out of the state's hands. Get a pen, because your lawyer might not have mentioned these. Step 1, the 5-year firewall. You need to upgrade that leather binder. We're moving your primary residence into an irrevocable Medicaid Asset Protection Trust, or a MAPT. I know irrevocable sounds scary, like a permanent tattoo. But here's the kicker. It's the only way to make your house invisible to the government. Once that deed is recorded in the name of the MAPT, the 60-month clock starts ticking. Tick-tock. Every day you wait is a day you're exposed. After 5 years, that house is no longer an available resource. If you get sick in year 6, the state can't touch it. It's like putting your house on a different planet where the Medicaid laws don't apply. Step 2. The IRMAA bypass, Form SSA-44. Remember how Margaret's Social Security vanished because of the Medicare surcharge? You can stop that cold with one simple piece of paper. If you're hit with an IRMAA penalty because you sold an asset or had a life-changing event, do not just pay it like a sucker. You file Form SSA-44 with the Social Security Administration. You check the box for loss of income producing property. This is your get-out-of-jail-free card. It forces the government to stop looking at your old tax returns and look at your current reality instead. It stops the Social Security clawback in its tracks and puts that money back in your pocket where it belongs. Why don't they tell you this? Because they'd rather keep the money. Step 3. The secret weapon, the ladybird deed. If you live in a state like Florida, Texas, or Michigan, you have access to a legal loophole called an enhanced life estate deed. Yes, it's actually named after Lady Bird Johnson. This is like the Swiss Army knife of estate planning. It lets you keep 100% control of your home while you're alive. You can sell it, mortgage it, or leave it. But the moment you pass away, the house transfers to your kids instantly. Because it happens outside of probate in many states, it stays out of the probate estate. Why does that matter? Because if there's no probate, there's no Medicaid estate recovery. The state's collection agency comes knocking at the door, but since the house isn't in your estate, they go home empty-handed. It's a legal vanishing act for your biggest asset. Now here's the most important part. The sequence is everything. If you do step 3 but forget step 2, you lose your cash flow. If you do step one too late, you lose the house to the 5-year look back. You have to be proactive. The system isn't going to tap you on the shoulder and offer you these options. The system is working perfectly. It's designed to ensure the middle class pays for their own end-of-life care until they are impoverished. Meanwhile, the ultra-wealthy are laughing all the way to their offshore trusts. A revocable trust was a great tool for the 1990s. In the 2020s, it's a liability. It's a kick-me sign on your back. You worked 40 years to build your castle. Don't hand the keys to the state. If this deep dive saved you from a $500,000 mistake, do me a favor. Share this with one person you care about who's approaching 65. Most people won't see the trap until they've already stepped in it. I've linked the legal citations, the 42 U.S. Code, and a walkthrough for Form SSA 44 in the description below. Go check it out right now. Protect your legacy, because if you don't have a plan for your money, the state definitely does. And I promise you, you're not going to like it. See you in the next breakdown.